Hello and welcome to Extra Time, the sports-related chat show with me, Gary James, and guest local and international field hockey player and coach, Gavin Featherstone. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for coming on the show. Before we talk hockey, though, you started off in a completely different sport, didn't you? You started off as a footballer. Tell us about that.
Well, my family were basically covered with football from the start.
Yeah.
In fact, my mother met my father on the football field. She was out in service in a country house in Essex. Yeah. My father was a docker and they met up, and I was the product of that. So all my uncles, who were all Geordies from the northeast, used to come down to London, and they introduced me to the game when I was 5 years of age. My first game was Chelsea versus Newcastle United, and it was 6-5 to Chelsea back in 1958. But wow. From that point onwards, I just played football 3 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. And when you were at school, was that the aim then? Like lots of school kids, I want to be a professional player?
Yeah, I wasn't born in what you call the most affluent neighbourhood of London, and most of the people either worked in the docks or wanted to get out through the entertainment industry. They played musical instruments in that era, or they were sportsmen. And so one way out of our background, if you like, was to play football. And
in the early days, then I know you were at Chelsea, weren't you, to start off in? Is that the youth career you were?
Yeah, I was first spotted by Manchester United. I went up there and went for a complete summer there shortly after England won the World Cup in '66. Yeah. And when I came back down, basically I played the normal local youth club stuff, and I was spotted and went to Chelsea at Stamford Bridge and signed on schoolboy forms. And had a year and a half as a schoolboy. We trained Tuesday, Thursday nights behind the goal at the shed end. That's how we trained. It was normally a mud heap, and it was a very, very big terracing that we used to run up and down with people on our backs in those days. It was a very tough regime to be a footballer in that era.
And who was the manager at the time of the Chelsea?
Well, I was in a crossover manager between Tommy Docherty, who is well known to viewers in the Midlands, and then Dave Sexton took over. Were very different types of manager. We had Frank Blunston, who used to be Chelsea, and he played a few games for England as the youth coach. But the amount of coaching that was involved was very limited in those days. And, I played against all the major London teams, and one of the teams I played against, I can remember well, was playing against Graham Souness. And he was playing for Tottenham Hotspur, and we went over there as apprentices, and we lost 5-1. And so I always remember him playing with Steve Perryman, and they went on to great things.
Yeah. So two of there's names and still involved in football to this day, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And then you moved. Didn't you move to Tottenham yourself then?
No, I stayed at Chelsea, and then one day I went into my school. I was at a grammar school, and the headmaster just got hold of me and said, your days of playing football are over. We think you can go to Oxford or Cambridge University. And I said, what? I didn't understand. I couldn't believe it. My father was there in the room, and he just said, sorry, you cannot play football and go to university. Back in 1969-70, it was impossible. So my parents and the headmaster made the choice for me, and I've only ever kicked a football once since then.
And good decision? Was it the right decision? Did you enjoy Oxford?
Well, I don't know. When I left Dave Sexton, because there was a big emphasis on very physical play, I was a bit of a loudmouth Londoner, maybe still am, but I actually said to him that you're going nowhere for the next 12 years. England's going nowhere. I may as well go and play a girls' game, which was hockey. And as it turned out, the next 12 years, we never qualified for a World Cup at football. All my contemporaries never had that pleasure. I think the first World Cup was 1982.
So when did the hockey start?
Well, I was playing simultaneously hockey and football. I was playing hockey at this school, Kingston Grammar School, and every evening I was playing football. I was playing. The weekends were crazy. Saturday morning, I was up at Hendon playing for Chelsea. Saturday afternoon, hockey across London. Sunday morning for my local youth team. So I was playing 3 major games of sport in every weekend.
And I know, because I'm thinking back when I was at school. Hockey was it's a girls' game. And never really did it. And the other thing that did me with the hockey, every time I tried it, I'm right-handed, but I play golf and cricket left-handed. And the hockey stick always felt awkward to me because it's flat on one side and curved on the back, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I could never really do it because I didn't have any left-handed hockey sticks.
Yeah, you sound as if you're an ice hockey player because you can actually play both sides ice hockey, but field hockey, they're always conscious that if everyone knows where the follow-through goes, then it can be avoided. If you had left-handed and right-handed players, there'd be follow-throughs of the hit coming in all directions. It would be crazy.
A nightmare. So,
Yeah.
so hockey, we've got a picture of you playing for England versus Germany, I believe. Tell us about you in this picture. When was this and what was the result?
Well, the picture basically shows a game at Lord's. In those days, it looks fairly sparse in the background, but we used to get about 4,000 or 5,000 people to every international, and there was a big build-up over weekend. You used to play a double header normally. You'd play Germany on the Saturday and Holland on the Sunday. And we had a big build-up at the Clarendon Court Hotel, and they would be taking along, and you'd be in the changing rooms at Lord's, which is associated with cricket, obviously. But in those days, the hockey players, a lot of them were sort of players that had experience of other sports. One few famous people that played, Mike Corby, you may have heard of in the squash arena. He was the world number 5, I think, at the time at squash, and was playing for the England hockey team at the same time. Ian Taylor, a Midlander from Worcestershire, became the great goalkeeper. Ian had been on amateur books with football. So there was incredible amount of talent in the England team at the time, but coaching hadn't taken off really. In the 70s, they were just starting to organise coaching systems in the country. And it really took decades to develop.
Yeah, and your career as a hockey player, I think you got injured, didn't you, in the 80s? Was it sometime?
Yeah, I unfortunately I rolled a car. I had a knee injury, which I had an operation for, and I rolled a car. It was my only ever accident in a car, and I rolled into a Somerset vineyard. Can you believe? I ended up in a vineyard, and the car blew up behind me 30 seconds after crawling out the car. And unfortunately, the injury I had was completely exposed again. And they told me that whereas I could do physical activity 5-6 days a week, was not the knee wasn't going to take that. And cross fingers, I've been okay since.
Lucky escape though. Otherwise, you might have been sitting here today.
Yeah, I was 20 seconds away from certain death. There's no doubt about that. I saw there was no car left. It was just burnt out wreck. So,
and you've done what, about 320 odd international games as a coach and as a player in hockey. And 1984, the youngest coach to take field hockey team to the Olympics. What was that? Which team was that?
Well, it was a tiny little country called the United States of America. I'd done a coaching stint. I believed in practical learning, not through coaching badges, although I had those. So I went out to the Far East and India, Pakistan and Australasia, learnt how they played the game. And then I was suddenly had an interview, and I had to report to an interview in Manhattan, New York City. And the interview was in Central Park, and I had to take a bunch of hockey players in Central Park, and all the head honchos were there watching, and they liked what they saw. And although I was only about 29, 30 years of age, they just said, we want a young coach, take our young team to the Olympic Games. And so that's where it started.
Was that a fairly new sport in America? Because we don't really think of the Americans as playing hockey. It's more like an Asian game, really, wasn't it?
Well, believe it or not, field hockey was moved over there by a woman called Constance Appleby back at the turn of the century. So it had been very, very predominant in the collegiate system in women's hockey. But for men's hockey, there were very few people that played, apart from expats. And my job was to be the Pied Piper in California. They set me up rather like the youth soccer in California. And part of my job every morning for 4 or 5 hours a day, I had to actually recruit young players to play field hockey for the men's program. So I did that in California, and we attracted over 1,000 kids to play on the same recreation ground every Sunday.
Oh, wow. So how did you attract them? Was it advertising newspapers, on the radio, or go to the schools? Or?
Oh, yeah, it was very American. I had a wonderful film, American film, called The Struggle and the Triumph. I had some early videos of hockey then, and we used to go into PE classes, and we'd do 6 back-to-back in a day. You had to be a worker in those days, and so it was a lot of fun. We took hockey sticks, did all types of juggling tricks and everything else. It was a show. And so I did 6 one-hour shows, and then on Saturday mornings they had to arrive at the local supermarket, and they'd be signed up. Hockey stick, and most important for America, insurance.
And we'll talk more about where you were in Hollywood in America right after the break, but for now it's half time on Extra Time. Now, welcome back. This is the second half of Extra Time with guest international hockey coach Gavin Featherstone and me, Gary James. Gavin, before the break, we were talking about you there over in America, and you lived in Hollywood. So what was that like?
Well, I lived on halfway between Hollywood and Malibu, which is on the coast. It's the playground place, and it was full of amazing, if you like, commercial people involved with television, radio, as you'd expect. It was the centre of the media, and I was asked to, when I got out there, to bring some tapes of field hockey because the American public didn't know much about it. And when I went there, a producer got hold of me and just said, have you got some stuff on bleeps and bloopers, which is basically...
outtakes.
Yeah, outtakes, foul-ups, comical bits and pieces. And cutting a long story short, I met quite a lot of technicians, and one of them really taught me a lot about how to make a video, a lot of the technical side of it, and how to edit and so on. In those days, it was a very manual process. So I learnt a lot from that side of it. They used to film us in training, and indeed they made a lot of fantastic suggestions, for the coverage of field hockey, which are sort of obvious today, but in those days they were brand new and innovative.
Yeah, and you made over the years about 20 DVDs that are now sold worldwide on coaching hockey?
Yeah, I between 1986 and perhaps into the latter part of 2007, I made about 18 DVDs and videos. I came back to the UK. The World Cup for hockey was in 1986, and I decided to make some very specialised videos on different aspects of the game for men and women's hockey. And I invited one of the technicians over, but they were too fond of the sun and the beach and everything else. Once the Olympics went, I was on my own 2 feet. But I made probably 18. It's been sold in over 20 nations worldwide.
And still going to this very day?
Yeah, people still order today. I mean, my last one was about eight years ago, but I sort of drew a halt at that stage because everything had become digitised, everything was digital, and basically people could almost make their own programmes on their own by then. It became too easy. Yeah. And in the early days and throughout my career in video, we could sell to the hockey coach or the hockey person. At the end of it, we were only selling the master tapes to national associations. That was how it was, how it moved on. Yeah.
And then you went on to coach in South Africa, didn't you? They took you on.
Yeah, I was coach of the Oxford Blues in England, and one of the players we had over was one of the top players in South Africa. And with the advent of Nelson Mandela and the new government, they needed someone who had a connection to international hockey. A lot of the South African coaches were a bit green, inevitably, because of the isolation years. And they took me on in 93-4. And it was a fantastic period for South African sport. The World Cup rugby was in South Africa. The hockey team was flying high. The football team won the Africa Cup. So it was a wonderful time where sport was like a god in those years. And, it took me to a World Cup, Africa Games and the Olympic Games.
And what was it like for those of us that have never been involved in the Olympics? Is that a highlight of a career as a coach or as a player, or what's?
Yeah, I think whereas World Cups are fantastic events, whatever sport you're involved in, and that's the be-all and end-all. But the Olympic Games is on a different platform altogether. You get that relationship between sports there. You really feel a sort of brotherhood and sisterhood about it all. And I've never been in any arena where everyone has respect for each other.
Yeah.
There isn't such a thing as lack of respect there. Everyone sort of rates each other, congratulates each other, and encourages. It is a huge family, the Olympic movement.
And you had a lot of success, didn't you, with the international and with the Olympic teams?
Yeah, I mean, but in my terms, I tended to take teams which were, B or C grade in international hockey. They weren't Great Britain or Holland or, India or Australia. I took the Americans, who were the youngest team ever, and then I took the South Africans straight out of isolation. But in both cases, we got America and South Africa into the top 10 in the world, and it's never been achieved since.
And what do you put that down to, Gavin? Your style of coaching, or just the fact that these guys had never really had any coaching before? Or?
Well, with me, as I mentioned earlier, that sport and football and hockey was in my blood. And my job as coach was to bring that out of the players that I had. They had to have a passion for the game, but they also had to have an IQ for the game. Right. It wasn't a question of running around like idiots on that field. They had to learn a game plan or variety of game plans, but they had to have that passion for the sport. And in both the South Africans, they were new back to international sport. That was easy. With the Americans, they're a competitive race, as you know, and they really responded very well to our home Olympics. So I think, I had a lot to do, but the environment was perfect for me on both cases.
And you must be very proud of the achievement on that.
Yeah, top 10 in the world. I mean, amazing, a little anecdote, I suppose, but the Americans, criticised me unbelievably after the last game of the Olympics, where we lost 2-1 to Australia. Now, Australia were the gold medal prospects, and half the American team had never played hockey 18 months earlier. So, but to an American, if you lose 2-1 to Australia, that's still bad news.
That's bad news. Yeah, they see the negative, not the positive, where you got to. And you linked with us in the Midlands. Of course, you came up to Alton in Solihull, the team, and then Coventry and North Warwickshire.
Yeah, basically, I've got some very good friends in hockey, and they'd seen me coach the Oxford Blues, and Alton approached me to coach them. And we actually produced a very comprehensive approach at Alton in those days. We had fantastic elder players like Barbara Hambley, Mandy Gatherer, but we needed a youth system. And equally off the field, we needed someone who could promote these young players, somebody who had a real eye in the marketing and commercial areas of the game. And we found that in Bob Morden, somebody who's very well known promoting sport here with Leisure Care in the Midlands. Between Bob and I, we were sort of, a lot of people said we were Clough and Taylor in disguise. And we basically ran the show for 4 or 5 years. And I don't know if you know this, but just in those 4 or 5 years, amongst the teenagers at Alton, between them, they went on to play 1,000 test matches for England and Great Britain. Just those 4 or 5 players, and which was a tremendous achievement. And the youth team kept winning the national title, and promotion after promotion for the first team. And so I owe a lot to Alton and Bob Morden as well, because they gave me that support system, and we worked very much together to get things going.
And then over to Coventry and Warwickshire.
Yeah, it was another connection. Nick Irvin had seen the work we'd done, and I was due basically to go into the commercial side with AstroTurf. And basically Nick said, have you got 3-4 months spare? And he also had a young group. And I went in just for 4 months, and I know we were in the Midlands Prem at the time, and we got Coventry up to the top 2 positions. And then, as I said, I had to leave. It was just a very short-term period at Cov.
And coming right up to date, you've written a book.
Oh, yeah.
Called The Hockey Dynamic. And that's out now, isn't it? It's been out for a few weeks or a while?
Yeah, it's been out for 2 weeks. Anyone could look it up on amazon.co.uk.
Yep.
It's available in Kindle as well as obviously the written text. But it's dynamic. I hope it proves that way when people read it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote on the back of it here from Jenny Bimpson, Beijing Olympics 2008. She says, Gavin is one of a few coaches that I would call a true expert in the game of hockey. Being coached by Gavin, learning from his knowledge and passion is without doubt one of the reasons that I was able to play international hockey for over a decade. I feel privileged to have been coached by him. Isn't that lovely? That's great.
It is. I didn't even write it myself, you know. So, but she was a fantastic player, and as you know, 10 years in the game says enough at that level, isn't it?
Yeah. And what are you doing with yourself these days? Are you still coaching? You're writing another book, or?
No. Well, basically, I spent last 3 years in the United States in the Ivy League. I always wanted to coach in the NCAA set up in America, and when I came back, I'd done 50 years in hockey. My first held a hockey stick September the 8th, 1964. So when it came to last autumn, I said, it's time, you know, to say, let's move on now and to get things down and record some of the things which are important for hockey. Hockey Dynamic really examines all the changes that have happened in hockey. It's very much a global view of the sport and really the behind-the-scenes story of the heroes, the innovations, the processes in the game. So I wrote that. I wrote another book, which is less reverent. It's called That Ain't Hockey, and that will come out. In the future. But this one, it takes up all my time promoting, and I'm doing seminars and various things like that in various countries. So that's really what I'm doing.
Well, you must come back on again, and we'll talk about the other book and more hockey. It's a great read, even for those that aren't into hockey or haven't played it. It's still a great read. But for now, Gavin, thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And if we're not talking about your sport, then please get in touch. Email extratime@bigcentre.tv. But for now, that's Full Time on Extra Time.